Hey, amazing devs and designers! In our first video in this BEM blah 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 blah. Hey, amazing devs and designers! In this first video, it's not the first video; it's the second video. Hey, amazing devs and designers! In our first video in this BEM series, we reasoned together why BEM is used to make our CSS reusable, maintainable, component-driven. Remember those buttons that we saw? Those cards that are reused and recycled throughout a website? Well, all of that is thanks to BEM architecture. But in this video, we're going to understand what the BEM stand for in BEM and actually see BEM in CSS. So stay tuned.
All right, this is a screenshot of the Salesforce website, and I chose Salesforce and HubSpot for a reason. And it's to convey to you that these are mature companies, and I'm sure as their company grew and matured during the years, well, so did their CSS. I'm sure their CSS also started off pretty sloppy and unmaintainable, but then they had to find a way to make components reusable and make the styles similar so that they all look exactly alike and that they can be reused in a scalable way. And I'm not sure if they're using BEM exactly, but BEM is one of the conventions that we can also use in our CSS to make our code more scalable and maintainable. So, which brings us to the B in BEM. B stands for block, and it's defined as an independent functional page component, which means that they can be placed anywhere throughout a website or throughout its web app or mobile app. It's a reusable component and it has a purpose. And in this case, we see a button block. And the way we classify it in BEM is by giving it a class name and describing its purpose. It's a button. It's meant to be clicked on. We can also call it .btn. That's another way most people classify button blocks, but don't give it a random name like this. Now, button blocks are indeed reused throughout the website. Here in Salesforce's case, we see it on a landing page. We see it as a call to action on their blog page. We see it here inside of pricing cards, which brings us to the next point. Blocks are nestable. They can be nested within other blocks. So here we have a card block or a card component. And inside of that component is this button here. It's a call to action. Watch the demo. Now, the E in BEM stands for element. Now, these are your items that make up the block component. They exist inside of the block because they depend on the block. They are not reusable components. Now, this user card is a block with elements inside of it. And the way we classify elements in BEM is by referencing its block and giving it a double underscore with the name of that element. So see how the element depends on the block preceding it? We first reference its block. Following that card block is that reference to the element, in this case, image. And so we give it a block double underscore element. We also see here the reference to the block and then the meta. So this is the meta elements. So we give it the name of the user's location, the subject he teaches, or ratings. Also, we start with the card block and then we follow with the blurb element. Now here's a quiz question for you. Pause the video and answer, is this a element or is this a block? What do you think?
Think about it. Take your time. I'm in no rush.
And yes, it's a block because it's reusable and exists independently of itself.
All right, let's talk more about this idea of dependent and independent and what it means for something to exist independently of itself.
A button exists independently of itself because it can be placed by itself on a home page, like here on a landing page or on a blog page or on the pricing card. It can be placed anywhere. It's just a button and we all know what it does. But elements, on the other hand, they cannot exist on their own. They are not independent because they need context. For example, would it make sense to see this user image floating on the hero section of a landing page, or to see a 5-star rating as a menu on the nav bar? No, they need to exist within a greater context, and in their case, it's a user card. That's the context that gives meaning to the elements inside of it.
All right, here's an analogy that I think will drive home the point about dependent and independence. Think of elements as dependent children. They depend on their parent. The parent tells a child where to be, how to behave, etc. And one day the child decides to wander off on his own, and the parent says, "Little child, you must be terribly confused if you think you can just float on your own on the navigation bar on the home page all on your own.
I'm your parent block, and if I tell you to stay within my context, then that's what you're gonna do. Got it?
Yeah, I got it. Wait till I tell Mom.
Now lastly, the M in BEM stands for modifier, and it makes these cosmetic changes to a block or element. It also affects the state of a block element. For example, is it toggled, is it focused, is it hovered? And the way that we classify modifiers in BEM is by first starting with the block in question, following it with 2 hyphens, and then giving it the name of the modifier. Let's take a look at an example here in CodePen. All right, let's take a quick look here at our CodePen. We see these reusable components. We have 2 anchor links, and we have this button class, BTN, BTN, and we also see some modifiers, BTN pilled. I'm guessing this is what gives it the pill shaped, and this BTN alert, which gives it a background color of alert, and a BTN info modifier, which gives it that blue color here. Let's confirm that. If we go take a look at our BTN styles, we see that BTN, this block, gives it a font size of 1.15 rem, and these following CSS styles that you see here. You know that we're going to have a basic gray background and the following padding definitions and a white text. But if we go further down, we see that there are modifiers for the background color in the case of the button being an alert button, or if it's the case that the button is info, we're going to have this background color. So let's confirm that. If we were to delete these modifiers, look what happens. We're going to get rid of this background color, right? And it's that 444 color, that gray color that we saw in BTN right over here. And if we go further up and delete the pill shape, look what's going to happen. You're going to have this basic button here. But this button itself is still reusable, but we're modifying here with these BEM definitions, with these BEM modifiers. So let's go further down and let's take a look at the card component. And one thing you'll notice is sometimes it's inevitable that we will have to create containers or wrappers. It's okay to do that. BEM, it's okay for you to create these containers as long as you need them. You can create elements out of these containers. So first, let's take a look at the component. We have a card component, which is pretty much this right here. This is our card component. It's reusable. Here's what I mean by that. If I go here and paste it, we have another card component. That's cool. Let's undo that. And let's take a look at this card deeper here. We see we have a card class. What is that made of? Let's go down and we see the card component right over here. So we have this background color of F7, F7, a border radius of 4 pixels, the following padding definitions of 1M and 2M, and a box shadow, just as we see here. For example, sometimes if we want to create a container for the image, that's totally fine, but you have to treat it as an element, not as a reusable block, because this is not meant to be reused. It's just meant to contain the image just for this case. So treat it like an element. So what I do is I do card underscore image, and then I give it a hyphen. And what's the hyphen? I call it container. That's how I do it. And then over here is the actual image, right? If that makes sense. We have the card meta. All of this stuff right here, all of this here is my meta, right? But I also give it, I create wrappers as necessary. But in the case of this name, I don't need a wrapper. I just gave it card name and an H3. But for the location here, because this is a span element, I did need a wrapper. So I called it card location container. Again, this is an element. So I treat it as the card underscore location container. And then here is my actual card location element. So on and so forth. Be sure to play with this CodePen, understand the elements of BEM here as it's coming, to you live in this CodePen. Play around with it, modify it, do it as you wish. Sometimes you will run into other libraries. So for example, Font Awesome has its own way of creating classes. It's okay to use their class name. BEM isn't some divinely inspired, law that you have to follow if you're using other frameworks. It's okay to use their class names. Just use BEM as you wish, right? You don't have to, live by it and die by it. Again, you have the blurb content here. So for example, this is my card content. I made this as a wrapper. I should just call this container maybe, right? And here is my card blurb over here. And that's the paragraph. And then here is that block, the button, right? It's not an element, it's actually a block as we see here at the top. All right, that does it for BEM. If you have any questions, comments, please send them my way. Let's build together and let's help each other out. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.